Ethan loses his home. At 14, Ethan Walker learned how fast the word family can stop meaning anything at all. The house he lived in with his aunt and uncle had never really felt like home. It was just an old, narrow place on the edge of a Midwestern town, with peeling paint and a porch that sagged like it was tired of trying to hold itself up. For almost 2 years, it had been the closest thing Ethan had to shelter after his parents died. Not warmth, not love, just a roof. That night, the air inside felt heavier than usual. The television muttered some random game show in the background, but no one was actually watching. The smell of reheated leftovers lingered from the kitchen, a little sour, faintly burned, like even dinner had been an afterthought. Ethan stood near the hallway, backpack already zipped, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone pale, like his body knew something his mind was still trying to deny. His aunt didn't raise her voice. Somehow that made it worse. "You can't stay here anymore," she said, arms crossed, eyes fixed somewhere over his shoulder. It was like looking directly at him would make this too real, too human. "We've done what we could." Ethan had spent nights imagining this moment and rehearsing what he'd say. He'd planned promises in his head. He'd work harder, stay quiet, stay out of the way, be smaller, easier, invisible if that's what they wanted. But now, with the words hanging in the air, his throat locked up. Every clever defense, every desperate plea, just died before it reached his tongue. "I'll sleep in the garage," he managed finally, his voice cracking in the middle. "Or the basement. I won't be any trouble. You won't even notice I'm here." His uncle sighed, the kind of tired, irritated sound adults make when they feel bothered rather than cruel. He didn't yell either. "This isn't up for debate, Ethan. You're old enough to figure things out." Old enough. Those 2 words hit harder than any slammed door ever could. Old enough to fend for yourself. Old enough to be someone else's problem, or no one's at all. 10 minutes later, Ethan was on the front porch with his backpack slung over one shoulder, the strap digging into his collarbone. The porch light clicked off without ceremony. The door closed. Then came the sharp, final sound of the lock sliding into place. That was it. No hug. No last words. Just a quiet, absolute ending. The October night wrapped around him, sharp and cold, biting through his hoodie. A thin wind scratched through the bare branches along the street, making them clatter like old bones. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and then went silent. Ethan stayed rooted on the porch for a moment, staring at the door like it might swing open again and reveal it was all some awful test. It didn't. No one called his name. No one asked if he had anywhere to go. So he walked. He followed the sidewalk out of habit, past houses glowing with soft, yellow light. Curtains were drawn, but sometimes he caught quick glimpses through the cracks. Families eating together, someone laughing, someone calling a kid to wash their hands. Each window felt like a tiny world he'd been quietly erased from. Ethan kept his head down and just kept moving because right then, walking away was the only thing he still knew how to do. The $5 auction decision. By the time Ethan reached the edge of town, his legs ached and his chest felt hollow, like someone had quietly scooped something important out of him and forgotten to put it back. He found an empty wooden bench near the closed feed store and sat down, his backpack sliding off his shoulder with a heavy thump. For a moment, he just stared at the cracked sidewalk, listening to the quiet hum of a distant highway and the creak of the bench beneath him. Slowly he unzipped his backpack and took stock of his life. 3 shirts. 1 extra pair of jeans. A toothbrush. A folded photo of his parents he never showed anyone. And a small wad of crumpled cash, held together with a tired rubber band. He unwrapped it and counted. $1. 2. 3. 4. 5. $5. That was it. He counted again even though he knew it wouldn't change. As if staring a little harder might make another bill magically appear. It didn't. The town around him was almost completely silent, the kind of silence that makes every little sound feel too loud. His uneven breathing, the rustle of the bills, the faint buzz of a streetlight. He thought about his parents then, not in some dramatic, movie-style flashback, but in scraps of memory. His dad's loud, unrestrained laugh. His mom's hands tightening on his shoulders when she thought he wasn't paying attention. The way they used to say, "We'll figure it out," even when they clearly had no idea how. They weren't here to say it now. Morning came gray and unforgiving. Ethan had curled up behind the feed store, using his backpack as a pillow, waking every hour as the cold crawled deeper into his bones. When he finally stood, his muscles protested, but there was no one else to move his body for him. He walked. Near the courthouse, a small bulletin board sat crooked against the brick wall, cluttered with faded flyers and old announcements nobody bothered to remove. Yard sales long past. Lost dogs never found. A local fair from months ago. Most people passed it without even glancing. Ethan didn't. A sheet of paper taped on at an angle caught his eye. County auction, unclaimed property. He stepped closer, squinting at the worn print. The list was short. Old farm equipment. Scraps of land nobody wanted. And then, near the bottom, almost like an afterthought, abandoned house, outskirts of town. Minimum bid, $5. Ethan's heart thudded once, hard. Everyone in town knew that place. The rumors drifted through school hallways and diner booths, the way all small-town stories do. Some called it the dead house, others just that old wreck. Kids dared each other to go near it in the summer. Adults lowered their voices when it came up, like even talking about it too loud might invite bad luck. Someone had frozen there once, people said. The roof was half gone. It was cursed. Useless. Better left to rot. $5. Ethan looked down at the money in his hand, then back at the paper. Somewhere inside him, past the fear and the anger and the bone-deep loneliness, something very small went still. He didn't feel brave. He didn't feel hopeful. He just felt decided. If you're still here, it means this story has already hooked you. Stick around, tap that subscribe button, and drop a comment about what you would have done with those last $5. Walk away or take the risk. Buying the $5 house. The auction room felt like it had been built for other people's lives, not his. It was a drafty space that smelled like dust and old wood, with folding chairs lined up in uneven rows. A few farmers leaned against the walls with their hands buried in their pockets, boots leaving faint tracks on the worn floor. The county clerk stood at the front, reading from a list in a flat, bored voice, like this was just another chore on a long, thankless day. Ethan slid into a chair near the back, clutching his $5 in his pocket like someone might try to take it from him at any second. He didn't exactly belong there. No parents. No guardian. No one to stand beside him and explain what was happening. Just a skinny 14-year-old in a worn hoodie, pretending his heart wasn't pounding loud enough to shake the walls. The bidding started. Old farm equipment. A rusted trailer. Scrap land nobody really wanted but someone might gamble on if the price stayed low enough. People called out numbers in calm, practiced voices. Head shook. Hands lifted. Deals closed. Ethan barely heard it. His brain kept looping one single fact. Abandoned house, outskirts of town. Minimum bid, $5. When the clerk finally reached it, the room went strangely quiet, like everyone knew this was the joke item on the list. Abandoned house, Outer County Road, the clerk read, barely looking up. Do I have a bid? Starting at $5. Silence stretched. No one shifted. No one cleared their throat. No one even pretended to be interested. The house everybody whispered about. The one they'd warned their kids away from. The one they said would kill you if the cold didn't. Ethan's fingers dug into his pocket. He could feel each crumpled bill. $5. All he had. Maybe all he'd ever have. He thought about the porch light clicking off behind him, the sound of the lock, the way no one had chased him down to stop him from leaving. If he walked out now, he'd still have $5. Enough for a few meals. Maybe a cheap room for a night or two if someone didn't mind taking cash from a kid who looked like trouble. But after that, the sidewalk, the feed store, the cold. The clerk cleared his throat. $5. Anyone? Ethan's hand went up before he could talk himself out of it. A few heads turned. Someone near the wall let out a quiet chuckle, the kind meant more for their friend than for the room. Not cruel exactly. Just disbelieving. $5, Ethan said louder this time so there was no mistaking it. The clerk blinked, finally focusing on him. For a second, confusion flickered across his face, followed by a small shrug that said, "Not my business." "All right," he said. $5 bid. Any other offers? Silence again. No one countered. No one rescued him from his own decision. "Sold," the clerk announced, bringing the gavel down with a dull thud that sounded, to Ethan, like a door slamming and a new one opening at the same time. A few people smiled in that soft, amused way adults do when they think a kid doesn't understand what he's done. But Ethan walked to the front anyway, legs shaking, and signed his name with a borrowed pen. The letters came out uneven, but he pressed hard, like he could anchor himself to the paper through ink alone. When he stepped outside, the sky seemed brighter than it had in days. He had no idea how to fix a roof, patch walls, or survive a winter in a place everyone else had written off as dangerous and useless. But for the first time since the night his aunt told him to leave, Ethan Walker owned something. The world had handed him almost nothing, yet now, he had a deed in his pocket and a house with his name on it. And sometimes, having one thing that is yours is enough to make you take the next step. First look at the $5 house. The walk out to the house felt longer than any distance Ethan had ever covered, even though it didn't look that far on a map in his head. He followed a road that started as cracked pavement, then turned to gravel, then finally narrowed into two muddy ruts cutting through fields the color of old straw. With every step, town slipped further behind him. The houses, the streetlights, the low murmur of cars, all swallowed by open land and a sky that felt way too big for a 14-year-old carrying his entire life in one backpack. Doubt walked beside him the whole way. He replayed the soft laughter from the auction, the way people had looked at him, not angry, not mocking, just amused, like watching a kid try to lift something far too heavy, knowing he'd drop it sooner or later. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was stupid. Maybe he should have kept the $5 and figured out something else, anything else. But anything else had never actually shown up for him. By the time the house came into view, the sun was starting to drop, sharpening the shadows and turning the sky a washed-out gold. At first, from a distance, it barely looked like a house at all. Just a sagging shape slumped against the horizon, hunched like an old man who'd given up on standing straight. The closer he got, the worse it looked. The roof bowed inward, heavy and tired, with one whole section caved in like a broken rib. Weather-beaten boards hung at odd angles, creaking softly when the wind pushed them. The windows weren't windows anymore, just dark, empty holes where glass used to be, like the house was missing its eyes. The front door leaned sideways on one stubborn hinge, scraped raw where it dragged against the frame. "This is it," Ethan murmured under his breath. "This is what $5 buys." He stepped onto what used to be the front porch. The wood groaned under his weight, but it held. Barely. He reached for the door, hesitated, then pushed. It scraped open with a protesting screech, and a rush of cold, trapped air hit him in the face, carrying a smell that stopped him dead. Damp wood. Old dust. Something sour underneath, like time itself had been rotting in there. For a moment, he stood in the doorway, backpack still on, heart pounding hard enough to make his vision pulse. Part of him wanted to turn around, walk back to town, pretend none of this had ever happened. But the memory of that porch light switching off behind him, of the lock clicking shut, pushed him forward. He stepped inside. The floor was a mix of warped planks and hard, uneven dirt. Leaves had blown in through broken windows and piled in drifts against the walls. Old cobwebs hung from the corners like shredded curtains. Somewhere above him, a bird fluttered frantically, startled by his presence, then vanished into the rafters. Light slipped in through gaps in the walls and holes in the roof, catching dust in the air and making it sparkle like tiny floating embers. There was no furniture. No warmth. No sign anyone had cared about this place in a very long time. And yet, under all that ruin, something about the silence felt different. Not the cold, empty silence of being shut out. A quieter, waiting kind of silence. Like the house wasn't rejecting him, it was just there, daring him to decide what came next. Ethan walked slowly along the walls, counting steps without meaning to. He crouched beside one of the old logs that formed the structure and pressed his hand against it. The surface was rough, splintered, scarred by weather and time. But beneath that, solid. Not everything here was ruined. He sat down heavily on a half-collapsed crate near the wall. His chest ached. His hands were trembling and he couldn't tell if it was from fear, cold, or both. He pulled the folded deed from his pocket, smoothed it on his knee and stared at his own name printed there. For the first time in his life, something official said he belonged somewhere. The house was broken. Forgotten. Unwanted. So was he. And somehow that made this place feel less like a mistake, and more like a beginning. Part 5, First Nights in the House. That first night, Ethan chose the house over the open sky, not because it was safer, but because the thought of curling up outside again felt worse. The air inside was knife cold, but at least there were walls, crooked, cracked, and full of holes, but walls all the same. He wedged the front door as best he could with a broken plank, more for the feeling of protection than any real security. If something wanted in badly enough, it wouldn't have to try very hard. He spread his jacket on the driest patch of ground he could find and sat down, pulling his backpack into his lap like a shield. The dirt pressed through the thin fabric of his jeans, stealing heat from his legs. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapped his arms around them, and tried to make himself smaller, tighter, less exposed to the cold seeping in from every direction. Darkness settled slowly, turning the ruined room into a shadowy blur of jagged edges and empty spaces. Without the distraction of movement or noise, every sound became sharp and important. The wind slipped through cracks in the walls, making a low, ghostly whistle. Loose boards shifted and tapped against each other. Somewhere in the ceiling, something small, maybe a mouse, maybe something bigger, scratched and scurried. Every time a new sound echoed, Ethan's eyes snapped open. He wasn't used to being this alone. Even in his aunt and uncle's house, where warmth and kindness had always felt rationed, there had still been the dull comfort of other people breathing in the next room, the murmur of a TV, the clink of dishes. Here there was none of that. Just him, the wind, and a house that didn't quite know him yet. Cold worked its way through his hoodie into his spine, his fingers, his toes. It wasn't the sharp sting of stepping outside on a chilly morning. It was slower, heavier, like the cold was patiently climbing through his body, inch by inch, determined to claim every part of him. His teeth started to chatter. He clenched his jaw to stop it, but that only made his head ache. For a while he tried to sleep. He'd close his eyes, count his breaths, and pretend he was somewhere else, anywhere else. His parents' old apartment. A school camping trip that never actually existed. A room with a heater that hummed all night. But every time he drifted close to sleep, a new noise snapped him back, sending a shot of panic through his chest. At some point, when the darkness felt thickest and the cold felt personal, he sat up, hugging his knees tighter, pressing his forehead against them. "You can do this," he whispered into the dark. His voice sounded small and strange in the empty room, like it belonged to someone else. He didn't fully believe the words. Not yet. But saying them out loud made them feel slightly less impossible, like maybe they were a story he could grow into. Hours crawled by. Eventually, exhaustion did what comfort couldn't. His body, too tired to argue with the cold anymore, pulled him down into a thin, restless sleep full of half-formed dreams and sudden wake ups. When morning finally came, it didn't bring warmth, but it did bring clarity. His fingers were stiff. His back was sore. His stomach ached with hunger. But he was still there. The house hadn't collapsed. The night hadn't killed him. And as pale light slid through the broken windows and spilled across the floor, one simple thought settled in his mind. If he was going to survive here, this place couldn't just be a roof. He was going to have to make it a home, whether it wanted to be one or not. Odd jobs and meeting Ray. Morning hit hard. Ethan woke up stiff and aching, every muscle complaining about the cold, the floor, and the night that had refused to end. His fingers felt clumsy as he pushed himself upright. His breath showed in front of his face in thin, pale clouds. The house was still there, broken, drafty, and unforgiving, but it hadn't fallen on him. Somehow that counted as a win. His stomach growled, sharp and insistent, reminding him he hadn't eaten since, before everything. $5 were gone. The deed in his pocket felt heavier now, like it had weight but no warmth. He stepped outside into a world painted with frost. The fields around the house were dusted silver. Each breath stung his lungs. He stamped his feet, trying to wake up his toes, then slung his backpack over his shoulder. He didn't go back to town to ask for help. He wasn't ready to see pity in anyone's eyes. Or worse, annoyance. Instead, he went looking for work. All day, he drifted quietly around town, offering to help wherever someone looked like they might need an extra pair of hands. He cleaned out a cluttered hardware shed for an old man who kept apologizing for the mess. He hauled boxes in the alley behind a diner, his arms burning as he stacked crate after crate. He did small, boring things nobody wanted to do because right now, doing anything was better than doing nothing. For his trouble, he earned a few wrinkled bills and a lukewarm sandwich that he ate too fast, barely tasting it. People started to notice him, but not in a big, dramatic way. Just quick glances. Quiet whispers. A muttered, "That's the kid who bought the old place," said like it was half legend, half warning. He could feel eyes on him when he walked down the street, and he kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, pretending not to care. By late afternoon, the cold had crept back into his bones, and his fingers felt raw from gripping and lifting and carrying. He pushed open the door of the hardware store mostly to warm up for a few minutes. A bell chimed overhead as he stepped in, and the familiar smell of oil, wood, and metal wrapped around him like a rough, practical kind of comfort. Behind the counter stood a broad-shouldered man with gray hair and sharp, tired eyes. He looked up as the bell rang, taking in Ethan's worn jacket, chapped hands, and the way he hovered just inside the door. "You're the boy," the man said not unkindly. Ethan stiffened. "I guess so." "The house," the man added. $5 house. Ethan nodded, waiting for the joke, the lecture, the question about what on earth he'd been thinking. "You planning on fixing that wreck?" the man asked. "Yes, sir," Ethan said before he could second-guess himself. The man snorted softly, like he'd expected that answer. "That house killed a man once." "The cold did," Ethan replied quietly, surprising even himself. The words slipped out before he could pull them back. His face heated, but he didn't look away. "I won't let it do it again." Something in the man's expression shifted then, Not exactly a smile, but not dismissal either. Interest maybe. Respect, but only the kind you still have to earn. Name's Ray Collins, he said. I run this place. Ethan nodded. I've got time. And I can work. I just don't really have a plan yet. Ray leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. Winter's coming early this year. I know. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, Ray sighed like he was arguing with himself and losing. He reached under the counter and set down a small box of bent nails and a roll of twine. Scrap, he said. You can have it. Ethan stared. I don't have money. Didn't ask for any. Ethan swallowed. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ray replied. If you're still alive come spring then we'll talk. Ethan left the store with the box under his arm and the twine in his pocket, the cold still biting at his face, but now for the first time he wasn't walking back to the house completely empty-handed.